Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment, but first, Uche Okoronko with today's business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Beatrice. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Uneasy calm is restored in Zimbabwe as South Africa calls on SADC to intervene and end the currency crisis. And the UK has dropped investigations on Credit Suisse Bank related to an alleged fraud in Mozambique. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you, Beatrice.
Uche, thank you. Let's begin in Zimbabwe, where police have arrested an activist pastor for allegedly inciting violence through social media among Zimbabweans. According to the man's lawyer, armed policemen apprehended Evan Mawarire at his home. Recently, President Emmerson Mnangagwa introduced a 150% fuel hike to stem Zimbabwe's deepening economic crisis. Many Zimbabweans are angry about the increase and have closed down businesses and schools as a result of this. CGTN's Theresa May reports.
Are you okay?
On Zimbabwe's third day of unrest over a steep increase in fuel prices, police arrested a renowned pastor at his home in Harare, one among scores of people detained in a clampdown. Evan Mawarire, known for being a fierce critic of former leader Robert Mugabe, was charged with inciting public violence. He told Reuters that police surrounded his house after he urged fellow citizens via Facebook to protest by staying home.
We've asked how asking for people to stay away can constitute incitement to violence. But of course, this is a new dispensation, guys.
President Emmerson Mnangagwa introduced the 150% fuel hike to stem Zimbabwe's deepening economic crisis as the country suffers from a huge shortage of US dollars and an unemployment rate of over 80%. But many Zimbabweans reacted angrily to the increase. On Monday, roads were barricaded and tires were set alight. 3 people, including a police officer, died during violent demonstrations. Wednesday marked the third and final day of stay-at-home protests called by the unions. Businesses, schools and government buildings remained closed, and some of those wanting to go to work were left without any transportation to get there. Theresa May, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has appealed to the Russian leader Vladimir Putin to help him grow his country's struggling economy. He is currently in Moscow. Lucy Taylor has been following the president's tour.
It's no secret that Zimbabwe's president is looking for investment, and Russia is looking for a bigger stake in Africa. So, from new oil and gas projects to modernizing the army, at these talks, everything is on the table.
I would wish that we now attend to deepening economic cooperation between our country, which is developing, it's a third world country, so that you, as a senior brother, you can hold my hand as I try to develop Zimbabwe.
We are ready to do everything that is beneficial to our 2 countries and our peoples, and that will be important to achieve the plans you have set.
President Mnangagwa has already agreed a new mining partnership with the Russian diamond giant Alrosa, and he's attending a business forum in Moscow, keen to attract Russian investors to help overcome his country's financial troubles.
There is general potential in Zimbabwe at the moment because, of course, it's the level of education is pretty high by African standards, and so there is a lot of things that can be done. There's already a good background for development.
But the struggles at home make the need for deals here even more urgent. Before this visit, President Mnangagwa's spokesman said he expected a bumper harvest of agreements to come out of it to boost Zimbabwe's economy. The crisis back home now puts extra pressure on the president to make good on that promise. But as his tour continues here in Moscow, the headlines from Harare strain his key message that Zimbabwe is open for business. Lucy Taylor, CGTN, in Moscow.
British lawmakers have begun debating a motion of no confidence in Prime Minister Theresa May a day after they overwhelmingly rejected her Brexit deal. The opposition Labour Party leader called the defeat the biggest in British history and urged her to step down.
Isn't it the case, Mr. Speaker, that with every other previous Prime Minister faced with the scale of defeat last night, they would have resigned and the country would be able to choose the government that they want.
He has been calling for weeks for a general election in this country, and yet on Sunday, when he was asked in a general election would he campaign to leave the European Union, he refused to answer. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 5 times he refused to answer. The government's policy is that we're leaving the European Union on the 29th of March, but the EU would only extend Article 50 if actually it was clear there was a plan that was moving towards an agreed deal.
The Prime Minister has refused to resign and is likely to win Wednesday's vote with backing from her Conservative Party and its allies. If she does lose, however, the country would likely face a snap general election. Theresa May defended the original Brexit vote, saying the country decided in 2016 to leave the European Union. Parliament has given the government until Monday to come up with a new divorce plan.
He has voted against his...
Well, let's cross over to London now and get more on this. CGTN's Richard Bestick is in London for us. Richard, so what more can you tell us about the ongoing debate? And could you explain just how this vote of confidence works?
Well, I can, Beatrice. The outlook for Theresa May's government is as bad as gloomy as this English weather is at the moment. Dark clouds hovering over it. It was in the wake of that quite devastating defeat, as you say, the greatest defeat in British parliamentary history for a sitting British government. It was inevitable that there would be a motion of a general election. These are far from normal times as the clock ticks down to Brexit in just now 73 days. The challenge to the government, though, is unlikely to prove successful, as you were saying, Beatrice. The reality is that even if there was a general election on the outcome of this vote of no confidence, the position for Britain would remain exactly the same. There are simply not enough people sharing a single vote of view on Brexit inside the parliamentary building to secure a path for any vision in the way ahead. And this is the crux of the constitutional crisis currently facing Britain. In a way, the vote of no confidence in Theresa May is something of a sideshow. The drama lies ahead. Can they get Brexit over the line?
Well, Richard, the outlook for the government, as you mentioned there, is rather gloomy at the moment. But for Theresa May, though, is she likely to win this vote of no confidence?
Yes, she's very likely to win the vote of no confidence. As I was saying, Beatrice, the way ahead is where the drama lies. Despite the fact that she'll win, she's not out of the woods by any means. She's got to come back to Parliament on Monday with a plan B. She says to secure that plan B, she'll be talking to her parliamentary colleagues on the ruling Conservative Party benches in Parliament. She'll be talking to her partners in the Democratic Unionist Party from Northern Ireland to find out if there's something that they can offer in the way of an idea that would be acceptable to the majority of people in the House. The reality is that it's looking very unlikely that that can be achieved with the clock ticking down. Her struggle continues. There is talk here tonight in London that she'll fly out and have yet more talks in Brussels and say, look, I told you so, I'm not going to be able to get this deal through Parliament. We're going to have to open up the talks again. Brussels will not do that. What about stopping the clock as Britain marches towards Brexit Day on March 29th? Well, Brussels will agree if there's a real reason for doing so. Not if Britain can just continue arguing how it's going to get out of Brexit without reaching any conclusion. So yes, Theresa May will survive, but she's got a lot of difficult talking and walking to do in the weeks ahead.
So a lot of difficult talking and walking in the weeks ahead, Richard, but the motion is also coming as Theresa May's deal is voted down in the historic Commons defeat. So what next for Brexit? Paint it for us.
Well, let's look at the agenda. This week she'll spend her time talking. Once she gets this debate out of the way, then we move into Thursday and Friday. Those will be days when she'll consult her cabinet. She'll ask them what ideas they have. Now, you've got to remember here, Beatrice, that this country is not just divided among the people and in the parliament over what Brexit is, but there are huge schisms inside the cabinet. She will be meeting with her cabinet colleagues to decide the way ahead. And then, of course, comes that Monday morning when she'll have to produce a plan B. Where do we go? What is the direction of movement for Brexit? Because at the moment, the British people, and indeed Brussels and the rest of the European Union, have no idea of the direction of movement for Brexit. It's a question now as to whether it can survive, whether there should be a second referendum, or economically the nuclear button, whether Britain crashes out of the European Union without any kind of trade deal whatsoever.
Richard Bestic for us there in London. Thank you. Well, let's go to the tragic news in Kenya, where the second phase of investigations into Nairobi's Dusit D2 attack are in full gear. Police have made 2 separate arrests within the city, and this follows earlier statements by senior government officials that the investigations will be swift to bring to justice those involved in the planning and execution of the attack. Earlier, Beryl Oro was at Dusit D2 and filed this report.
Wednesday morning, more than 18 hours later, the assault was over and the terrorists were neutralized. 700 people were rescued in total, and at least 15 people who were injured are receiving care in various hospitals in Nairobi. And although the number of fatalities stands at 14,
in terms of losses of life, that is something that the government would talk about. I don't want to talk about those figures because it's their responsibility. But secondly, unfortunately, in such instances, lives are lost, and we will have to reconcile these numbers before even numbers can be given. So please don't dwell on numbers in this case.
Focus is now directed to Kenya's criminal justice system to begin tightening the loose ends. So far, 2 people have been arrested, and the forensic teams have moved into the scene to gather evidence from the attack.
This operation has now come to an end in phase 1. We are moving now to phase 2, which is handling the criminal aspects of this situation.
Senior government officials strongly condemned the attack, calling for citizens to stand firm. However, this attack, like others in the past, leaves many lives shattered in the aftermath.
We will stand together as a people of Kenya and in solidarity with the rest of the world in the war against international terrorism. Terrorism will not pay, and it will never succeed, and it can never be allowed to succeed.
Kenya has faced a number of attacks in recent years, and even as the government has come out strongly to condemn the attack right here at Dusit D2, an upscale area in Nairobi, several questions still remain unanswered, and investigations are ongoing to establish the facts and the details of the attack. Beryl Oro, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Let's cross over to CGTN's Rama Nyang at 14 Riverside at the scene of that attack yesterday. Rama, now that the president has said the situation has been neutralized, what next for this operation? Because we still have people who remain unaccounted for and security forces are still at the scene. What is it they're doing there?
All right then, so Beatrice, at this point they're actually trying to figure out exactly how and where this group managed to pull off an attack of this magnitude. How are the logistics set up, for instance, who carried out surveillance on the target? Where did they stay? How did they move their arms and the money around? Those are some of the key questions that the investigators are working on at the moment. Now, to pull back from that into a much broader picture, will there be some kind of response, a policy response from Kenya's side against Al-Shabaab now that the militia group has effectively claimed responsibility for this assault? That's an equally important question, considering the fact that this group is proving yet again its ability to adapt and mount these sorts of kamikaze strikes and essentially fund them pretty much across the border. That being said, there's an important distinction that we do need to draw here for our viewers. The last such strike by Al-Shabaab was years ago, and as I'm sure we'll speak about shortly, the response to the January 15 attack compared to, say, the assault on Garissa University or even on Westgate are wildly different. Beatrice?
Rama, two key suspects have been linked to the attack and have reportedly been arrested today. What more can you tell us about that? What do you know?
Indeed, I don't have the identities of these suspects just yet, but local media reports indicate that at least 2 individuals, as you just said, have been taken into custody at this point. Police officers also were searching a house in an estate in Nairobi's northwestern area, the Ruaka area in general, early in the day. That search does suggest that one of the attackers had actually been living there, paying rent for several months. In the last hour as well, I've seen some rather interesting photos of a vehicle with the exact same number plate as the one that was used by the attackers in this January 15 assault. Now, I did reach out to the relevant government authority, that is the National Transportation and Safety Authority, to ask them, hey guys, what's going on here? They indicated they were not aware of the existence of a duplicate set of plates, at least not at that point in time, but they say they will facilitate any inquiry into that matter as part of that probe. Worth pointing out, though, just very quickly on top of that, that at this point in time, there are at least 50 people who are still unaccounted for in the aftermath of this attack. Beatrice?
Well, Rama, many are now drawing comparisons to the 2013 Westgate attack, which was also in the Westlands area. You have been there since yesterday. How different was it?
Right then, in terms of being different, well, for one, this incident was brought to a close much faster than the Westgate attack was. Official communication on the attack as it progressed was relatively better compared to that incident. I'm sure there will be, of course, a post-mortem later on down the line to figure out what can and should have been done a lot better. Much like the aftermath of Westgate, though, today is a lot less busy. There's a much smaller media presence over here and a focus on those who were injured, those who were traumatized, and those who were killed here. So far, we know of at least 14 individuals who were killed in this attack. Most of them, we should point out, Kenyan nationals. But it will take a long time, a very long time, for the mental, the physical, the emotional scars from this event to heal. A wider question, is Kenya perhaps much better at grappling with the national trauma that comes from these sort of events? That's something we'll have to watch out for over the next couple of days. But equally important, though, is what happens next in Kenya's official response to this, both within the country through the judiciary, but also across the border. Because remember, this incident does bring back to light the campaign in Somalia. Kenya's forces are there as part of an African Union force. How or if that campaign changes in response to this attack at the facility behind me will also be very telling. Beatrice? Right,
Ramanyang, for us there at Dusit D2, the scene of that tragic incident yesterday. Well, earlier we spoke to retired Brigadier General Mohammed Ahmed, a security expert, about Kenya's susceptibility to militant attacks and what exactly needs to be done.
Al-Shabaab in Somalia is not doing very well. They have been degraded. They have lost territory. They have lost that military power. They have lost, they have no financial base right now. And all this is very alarming for them. And they have gone down. And indeed, for almost some time now, there has been no major attack in Kenya, only in Somalia. What's happening now, certainly, is that they're trying to reaffirm that we are around. Just saying, don't brush us off. We are around, we are still strong, take note. That's the key message they're trying to pass right now, a psychological war to the Kenyans. The financial gain should not drive us to do what we are doing. We've always said this, that is a major weakness for Kenyans. Where the dollar is, they will go for it in this total disregard of security. So Kenyans must take this on. Don't just search for the dollar. Find out Is it good money? Is it clean money? Is it safe for me? And is it safe for my neighbor? And then going that. Something. We talk about corruption, weapons coming in, crossing almost 300 kilometers, all the way to Nairobi, through our territory. That must concern somebody. We have forces along the way. We have individuals, we have security and all that. Somebody must see this and say, well, I've seen this. I can assure you, there are Kenyans who will see somebody carrying a weapon, moving in their direction, and they feel it's dangerous, and they don't report it. Partly because they see also, reporting to the police, they fear. I have to assure them that the face of the police is also changing. They are very much now responsive to our reporting and all that. We must work together, both as population and security, to ensure we provide that 100% security for our population.
Meanwhile, as Kenya reels from the latest terror attack in Nairobi, world leaders are showing solidarity. The African Union and China are among others who have condemned the attack.
The African Union Commission has condemned the attack, saying it stands with Kenya and supports the country's effort in combating terror in the region.
The African Union is really shocked and saddened at this attack on the peace-loving people of Kenya, and we condemn it utterly. Terrorism has no place in what we do in Africa, and it is a shame that this happened. Now, the African Union is in full support of all Kenya's efforts to stamp out terrorism and to make sure that this does not happen again, and also to support Kenya in looking for the culprits and to addressing the issues involving that and to take them to justice, let justice prevail.
Kenyan neighbor Ethiopia has also condemned the attack.
Or condemns the attacks and sends a strong message that these kind of things should also be addressed in a peaceful manner as well. With regards to strengthening security as a result of that, regardless of this attack, Ethiopia, as part of its military reforms as well as part of its initial move towards security sector reform, is also strengthening its security. So this has been an ongoing process as part of the reforms as well. With regards to any threats related to what has happened in Nairobi as well, government is also working very closely with Interpol to be able to identify if there's particular threats to Ethiopia as well. But at this point, it's to guarantee you that strengthening of security is something that has been as part of the reform agenda as well.
Somalia's President Mohamed Farmajo, in a tweet, said his country stood with Kenya in the war against terror. Diplomatic missions based in Nairobi have also issued statements. The Chinese embassy in Kenya has commended security agencies for swiftly responding to the attack. It has also stated that it stands with Kenya as it battles threats posed by terrorism. British Prime Minister Theresa May issued a statement in Parliament condemning the attack and expressing support for the people of Kenya. A British national was among those killed in the attack. Outgoing American ambassador to Kenya, Bob Godek, has also lauded Kenya's security forces for the immediate and coordinated response. Sadiq Shaban, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. More pledges by politicians as campaigns heat up in Nigeria ahead of the February vote. And the African Union ambassadors discuss displacement and migration issues.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Well, it's just a month before the general elections in Nigeria. Many parts of the country are in campaign mood as politicians try to persuade people to vote for them. In exactly 30 days, Nigerians will choose a new president to rule them for the next 4 years. CGTN's Philly Haza tells us more.
Posters and billboards dominate the landscape in Abuja and across the country
as political parties try to influence Nigerians ahead of the polls on February 16th.
It's exactly 30 days to the much-anticipated presidential and senatorial elections in Nigeria. Tens of millions of voters will be heading to the polls to carry out their civic responsibilities and elect the country's leaders in what is largely expected to be the most fiercely contested election.
President Muhammadu Buhari is seeking re-election after returning to power in 2015. Then and now, he's running on promises of improving security, anti-corruption and the economy. Nigeria's economy slipped into recession in 2016 but returned to growth after Buhari implemented a recovery plan. But in early 2018, Nigeria became the country with the largest number of people in extreme poverty, according to Brooklyn's analysis of public data. Nigeria fell 12 places in the Transparency International Corruption Ranking for 2017.
We need a credible Nigerian who will emerge as a president that will make some of these our institutions like education to work very well. We will need a leader that will bring us out from this level of poverty.
So as a Nigerian, I hope this upcoming election will provide much job employment for the youths, for the graduates, because we have so many graduates on the ground still scouting for jobs.
The best candidate should win, candidate who can deliver the promises that they have made to the masses, so that we can have the full impact of the government.
The Independent National Electoral Commission says the number of eligible voters has increased by over 6 million to 84 million since the last election, with 90% collecting their permanent voter cards so far.
The Nigerian people are excited and they're ready, and we've never seen this level of preparedness towards an election. In 2019, Nigerian people now understand the power of their permanent voters card, because this is a card that shows equity and justice.
President Buhari of the ruling All Progressive Congress has promised the country will conduct the freest, fairest and most credible elections in the history of the country. His main opponent from the People's Democratic Party is Atiku Abubakar, the country's former vice president. They joined 72 other presidential aspirants. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
The African Union is holding its 32nd summit at the level of Permanent Representatives Committee. The summit is being held under the theme Refugees, Returnees and Internally Displaced Persons towards Durable Solutions to Forced Displacement in Africa. The recommendations of the Permanent Representatives Committee on the theme, as well as the African Union reform, are expected to be used by the Executive Council of the Union for later decisions by the heads of state. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala.
This is the 37th ordinary session of the Permanent Representatives Committee, and it's mainly ambassadors of the AU member states based in Addis Ababa who are looking at crucial continental issues to finally deliver their recommendations to the ministers' meeting. Over the last 2 days, the summit has discussed several agendas based on this year's theme: refugees, returnees and internally displaced persons towards durable solutions for forced displacement in Africa.
Signs of young men, because of a loss of hope, walking across the Sahara, getting drowned in the Mediterranean on flimsy, sea-going vessels, and some of them dying. So the AU seeks to focus this year on issues to do with statelessness and displaced persons. A lot of them have to do with issues of governance and human rights and democracy. So this is the theme of the year.
For most of 2018 and under the chairmanship of Rwandan President Paul Kagame, the African Union has been working on ways of implementing the much anticipated institutional reform. And on this summit, more will be discussed on ways of making the Commission efficient.
Under His Excellency President Kagame, the AU have been following administrative and financial reforms. And you know, reform is a continuing process. So the AU at this summit will be also looking at aspects of that reform which are not yet completed.
This summit will also look at the sexual misconduct report compiled on the headquarters of the union. The report has confirmed repeated sexual harassments against female employees of the commission. AUC chairperson Mosa Faki Mahamat has reportedly instituted a team of inquiry made out of 3 eminent lady juries.
The report shows that there's been systematic discrimination against ladies, against young ladies, to do with recruitment, to do with traveling, to do with all kinds. Now, the chairperson has studied the report, and we intend, according to the recommendations of the jurists who did the report, to go further, identify those issues and address them immediately.
The Permanent Representatives Committee has now finished its duties of preparing the agenda for the 32nd AU Summit with appropriate recommendations for consideration by the Executive Council. That meeting is scheduled to take place by the end of the first place people.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Let's start off in Zimbabwe. The ongoing protests over a decision to more than double the price of fuel in the country has South Africa's government concerned. Now, according to South Africa's Finance Minister Tito Mboweni, Zimbabwe should look to introduce after junior doctors ended a 40-day strike demanding salaries in US dollars and better working conditions. Now, scores of activists have been arrested in connection with the protests. South Africa's government representatives met with their Zimbabwean counterparts in December to discuss reigniting the economic health of the economy. Now, South Africa is also looking for backing from other SADC countries to end sanctions in Zimbabwe.
The presidents have to work together to ensure that whatever remaining sanctions on Zimbabwe are removed, because those sanctions are causing big problems for us, whatever we want to do. Because if you want to go and do anything which involves the US dollar and you are under sanctions, it's a problem. So our political leadership really, hopefully, will do something to remove the sanctions. It's key and central to the revival of the Zimbabwean economy.
And meanwhile, Britain's financial watchdog has dropped a criminal probe into Credit Suisse that's related to alleged fraud in Mozambique. Back in 2016, the Financial Conduct Authority launched an investigation into the Swiss bank's activities, which saw about $2 billion worth of loans to state-owned companies push the country into a debt crisis. Now, 3 former Credit Suisse bankers were arrested in London this month on US charges of conspiring to violate anti-bribery laws and to commit money laundering and securities fraud. Now, the country admitted in 2016 to undisclosed borrowing narrowing, prompting the International Monetary Fund and foreign donors to cut off their support, triggering a currency collapse and a default in its sovereign debt. And moving on now, it is estimated that more than 40% of the core skills needed to perform most business roles will change in the next 5 years or so. Now, the business sector and continental governments are looking at the talent ecosystem to determine what skills they would need to make themselves more efficient, more productive and more profitable. Here's Angelo Coppola, who sat down with Ziad Suleiman. He's the COO of IBM SA, and he talked about the fourth industrial revolution as well as skills development.
Tell me about this program that you've developed. What's the objective? What's the thinking behind it?
So the thinking, I think, is largely innovative. You know, it's to bring skills enablement to Africa. So it's not just South Africa. It's a fantastic opportunity for people in the market to understand more about technology, to be more enabled, and to get them better positioned from a skills perspective to be able to enter the marketplace.
So what kind of digital skills do the youth of the continent need to get ahead?
It's all about technology and the new emerging technologies, which includes things like blockchain, IoT, which is Internet of Things, cloud, security, quantum computing, all of those types of things.
But what about that baseline education level? How important is it that people go through the schooling system properly to develop that baseline?
You know, we're very fortunate in today's world, especially with things like DNA, which is Digital Nation Africa, where people of different levels are able to go into this portal for free, sign up and learn about the technology. And the more time you invest, the greater it is. I mean, Gary Player uses the example of the more you practice, the luckier you get, which is true. The more you work at something, the better you become. The more comfortable you are, the more confident you are. And the more that people, especially the youth, work with technology, spend time learning about it, etc., the more conversant they become, the better they become, the more innovative they become.
So what happens next for these people who have gone online and learned all about the new technologies to get prepared for the fourth industrial revolution?
I think in essence, the net is that it gives you opportunity and it gives you options. And in today's world, especially in Africa, you need options. Our people with the high unemployment rate need options as to how do they work. Do they become small entrepreneurs and develop something that's going to be the next best technology that changes the world? Or are they going to be enabled to be able to go into an employer, whether it be a large or a small company, to say, this is my skill, how do I add value to your business, and how do we jointly move forward?
Now, the British pound held its ground after the record defeat of the British Prime Minister's Brexit plan, as investors consider the next developments in the long-running saga. Now, the sterling tanked soon after the government's proposal on leaving the EU was soundly beaten, but it soon bounced back as traders bet there would not be a no-deal exit. Analysts say the positive news is that the options for the future are narrowing. Now, with May expected to win the no confidence vote on today, talk will move to what happens next. According to Gavin Friend at National Australia Bank, the momentum is shifting away from the harder Brexit route and towards a number of options ranging from postponement and a second referendum. Meanwhile, EU leaders expressed dismay and regret after the British Parliament rejected that Brexit divorce deal, saying they were stepping up emergency planning and warning that London was running out of time. The EU Commission warned that the chances of Britain leaving the bloc without an agreement had now increased. Now, the President of the European Council suggested that the only real solution was for Britain to stay in the EU if a deal is impossible. Meanwhile, EU leaders have insisted that there could be no renegotiation. But as the parliamentary defeat fed uncertainty in European capitals, several leaders called on Britain to come up with alternatives to the rejected withdrawal agreement.
It's now for the UK to tell us the next steps. And on our side, we will remain united and determined to reach a deal.
This result is the consequence of the British political system. the fight between left and right, the fight between Labour and the Conservative Party. There is a majority in the House of Commons backing that proposal. And if that proposal goes into the direction of a more deepened relationship with the European Union, we are ready to do so. We are not against this, on the contrary. Secondly, what we don't want is that this mess in British politics is now transferred and imported in European politics. So let's try to find a solution before the European elections.
Now, U.S. bank executives have indicated that the country's economic conditions remain solid, but the 26-day record-long government shutdown and unsolved trade issues could cause damage to the economy. Now, according to J.P. Morgan chief executive, the shutdown could reduce growth to zero if it goes on the whole quarter. Meanwhile, Citigroup chief executive says the company could make adjustments to current plans if conditions do weaken in the U.S. Michael Corbat described a disconnect between healthy consumer and job numbers and the growth fears that have disrupted financial markets in recent weeks. Now, he added that the biggest risk in the global economy now is talking themselves into the next recession as opposed to solid fundamentals. Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up on Global Business Africa, we'll bring you the latest on that Brexit no confidence vote as it. All that coming up.
Thank you. And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. Nigeria's film Up North places the headlines on the country's thriving sector.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Uganda says it is prepared to take in another 75,000 refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo, despite concern that the Ebola virus could spread to the country. The latest upsurge of refugees from the DRC comes as the African Union is discussing durable solutions to forced displacement in Africa. Here's CGTN's Isabel Nakiria.
It's a struggle to make ends meet. Grace Asio exalts living by farming on a small piece of land at the Alema refugee settlement in northwestern Uganda. This is one of the benefits Grace was given when she came to Uganda as a refugee 6 years ago.
Life was difficult when I arrived from South Sudan, but host communities here gave me seeds, and using this land given to me by the Ugandan government, I started growing crops and life is better now.
Uganda's open policy of welcoming refugees has been praised by the international community. Refugees are free to work and also benefit from healthcare and education. But aid agencies are dealing with another influx from the DRC caused by uncertainty around the recent election, as well as fear of Ebola spreading from that country.
We are working in a very delicate situation where we have the Ebola emergency also ongoing, so we have business continuity plan in place if in case we receive people who have been in contact with the affected people or who might have been affected themselves, which means that in case we receive any Ebola cases, the business should not stop.
Uganda hosts about 1.4 million refugees, most of them from South Sudan. The government says it needs continued support from the international community to be able to sustain the growing numbers. While aid agencies are switching to sustainable programs where refugees learn things like farming and carpentry, the government is urging regional partners to find durable solutions to the conflict in the region. As for refugees like Grace Asio, she says she will keep income coming in from her farm produce and only return to South Sudan if she's sure the war is over. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala.
The world's third largest film industry, Nollywood, continues to take the center stage with groundbreaking movies that have been viewed by millions on the international streaming platforms. The latest is Up North, a story of love and self-discovery that has been dubbed Nigeria's largest movie production. CGTN's Deji Badmus has more on the film that is considered Nigeria's most ambitious movie ever.
What's up, Daddy-O?
The movie is being hailed as a bridge between Nigeria's north and south, and a unique showcase of the other side of a part of the country tainted by the narrative of conflict, hunger and strife. It's set in Nigeria's northeastern state of Bauchi, and deliberately so, says producer and executive producer Editi Effiong.
Up North was inspired by a journey, a cultural journey I took off of Nigeria. I visited most of the states in Nigeria, but I spent a lot of time in the north. And I met people, I spoke to people, I got this new experience with a culture I hadn't really experienced. And after that journey through the country in 2015, I kind of had made a decision to tell new stories about Nigeria that we don't often tell.
The movie tells a story of how a billionaire father sends his rebellious son to the north for a mandatory one-year national youth service. The son later falls in love, makes new friends and finds his life's purpose in an environment he dreaded at first. The film also casts the spotlight on the topical issue of female education and the empowerment of the girl child in a region of Nigeria where the issue remains a big talking point.
From the reviews I've seen, people are excited about the quality of the film, the details of the film, how detailed it was. And I want to think that the efforts that was put into the film was important to making the film successful.
In terms of records in the Nollywood industry, Up North has set some. It's the largest film production in Nigeria and even West Africa as a whole, with a full-time cast and crew of over 150, while the largest day of filming involved 25,000 extras.
When we went there, we wanted to shoot a very big film. It turns out we were trying to shoot the biggest film ever made in Nigeria. Nobody had the experience to shoot a scene with 25,000 people. You know, none of us had the experience, so just getting people in a row, in rows, and getting to shoot that big, expansive scene was quite challenging, but I'm really grateful to the director, to the crew, this one needs to be done and will be done, and they just buckled down and did the great work that had to be done.
Hey, red shirt.
With no investor willing to put their money down to fund the movie project, Editi's and Knuckles film startup had to raise the over $300,000 needed to shoot the film all on its own.
I want to think that in future projects we'll have more institutional funding for it, because when you make a film for the first time, it's hard to raise money for that because nobody really believes if you're going to do it. I remember one of the actors who was going to be on the project saw the script and said, I would like to be a part of this, but I don't know if you guys can execute this at the scale that is written here.
Up North is already in cinemas across Nigeria and Ghana, and of course it's doing very well. The producer says the movie will soon be in the United States and the United Kingdom, as well as on international streaming platforms like Netflix.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. 6 months later, no